Most people remember Gravity Falls as a kid's cartoon about two twins spending summer with their great uncle in a weird Oregon town. The show ran for 2 seasons on Disney Channel and Disney XD from 2012 to 2016. But the people who made it slipped in jokes that flew right over the heads of the children watching. Stan Pines had a past full of scams, jail time, and shady women. Suze worked at the Mystery Shack and made comments that sounded innocent until you really listened. The signs around the shack hinted at lawsuits, fake products, and adult vices. Bill Cipher made remarks about pinball machines being human in ways that hit different when you grew up. The writers buried sex jokes, drug references, and dark humor in plain sight. Some of these were so quiet you needed to pause the screen to catch them. Others were said out loud and just got past the censors. Fans on forums have spent years digging through every frame and every line. Tonight we walk through every single one we could find. From the pilot episode, Tourist Trapped, all the way to the finale, the show was hiding a second layer of jokes for the grown-ups in the room. So let's start at the beginning, with the adult jokes that happened in Gravity Falls. The pilot already had Stan making tax jokes. The very first episode of the show is called Tourist Trapped, and it aired on June 15, 2012. Right from the cold open, Stan Pines walks out to greet a crowd of tourists at the Mystery Shack and says he is glad they all came on such short notice. He then turns and tells his great-nephew Dipper that this is the kind of crowd you only get when you do not pay your taxes. Now think about that for a second. The first joke the show tells you, before the theme song even plays, is about tax evasion. That is not a kid joke. A child watching that scene laughs because Stan is grumpy and his voice is funny. But anyone over the age of 20 hears it and knows exactly what the writers are doing. They are telling you who Stan is before you even know his last name. He is a man who cuts corners. He is a man who does not file his returns. He is a man running a tourist trap in the woods because the IRS probably cannot find him out there. The fandom has talked about this opening line for years. On Reddit threads about Stan's character, people point to that single sentence as the seed of his whole arc. The show told you in the first 30 seconds that this man was on the run from something. Whether it was taxes or worse, you had to keep watching to find out. And it turns out, the answer was worse. Much worse. We will get to that later when we talk about Stan's criminal record and the fact that he was wanted in multiple states. But for now, just sit with the fact that the very first joke in a Disney kids show was about a federal crime. In that same episode, Stan also makes a comment about the Mystery Shack being a place where things are not what they seem. He is talking about the fake exhibits, like the Sasquatch and the Rock, that looks like a face rock. But the joke lands twice, once as a goofy line about tourist scams, and once as a darker hint that Stan himself is not who he says he is. The writers were already planting the seeds for the big twin reveal in Season 2. They were telling you to question everything, and they were doing it with a joke about a man who fakes attractions to rip off tourists. There is also a small moment in the pilot where Mabel tries to find a summer romance, and ends up with a boy who turns out to be made of gnomes. The gnomes are stacked on top of each other inside a trench coat. When the trench coat falls open, you see a tower of small bearded men. Now, on the surface, this is a silly visual gag, but the implication is that Mabel was about to kiss what she thought was a boy. And that boy was actually multiple adult-looking creatures with beards in a coat. The joke is about catfishing. It is about how people on dating apps are not who their pictures say they are. A 12-year-old in 2012 did not know about catfishing. But every parent watching with their kid knew exactly what that scene was doing. The gnomes also have a line in that episode where their leader says he wanted Mabel to be their queen and bear their gnome children. He uses the phrase bear our young. That is a phrase about pregnancy, about a 12-year-old girl giving birth to gnome babies. The show plays it for laughs because the gnomes are tiny and ridiculous. But the actual content of the joke is horrifying when you stop to think about it. A grown gnome with a beard is proposing marriage and reproduction to a child. The fact that this aired on Disney Channel is something fans still bring up in forum threads. People joke that the gnome scene is the first sign that the writers were getting away with murder behind the scenes. The Legend of the Gobblewonker and the Shorts joke. The second episode is called The Legend of the Gobblewonker, and it aired on June 29, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper and Mabel go on a fishing trip with Stan and end up chasing a lake monster with Soos. Early in the episode, Stan announces that it is Family Fun Day. He brings out matching outfits for everyone to wear on the boat. The outfits include very short shorts that say Pines across the back. Stan is wearing his pair already, and the camera makes sure you see how short they are on him. The joke here is a classic dad joke about old men in inappropriately short shorts. The image of a balding older man with skinny legs sticking out of tiny shorts is a visual gag that goes back to comedy traditions older than most of the kids watching the show. But there is another layer to it. The shorts have the family name printed on the butt. Stan is essentially wearing what looks like booty shorts with his last name on his rear end. Soos finds this hilarious. Dipper is mortified, and the audience laughs because the joke works on multiple levels at once. Later in the same episode, Soos makes a comment about his grandmother and how she taught him to fish. He says she could fillet a fish faster than anyone he knew. The phrase fillet a fish sounds wholesome, but the way Soos delivers it, with a sort of dreamy, faraway look, makes it sound like he is describing something else entirely. Fans have pointed out that Soos has a habit of saying innocent things in ways that sound suggestive without him meaning to. He is too pure to know what his own words sound like. And that is the joke. The writers used Soos as a vehicle for adult humor that the character himself would never understand. The Gobblewonker episode also has a scene where Stan tries to get Dipper and Mabel to spend time with him. Instead of running off with Soos, he gets jealous and grumpy, and at one point mutters that he should have just gone to the casino. The casino reference is a tiny throwaway line, but it tells you something about Stan. He is the kind of grandfather figure who would rather be at a slot machine than on a boat with his family. The joke is about a certain kind of older man who has a gambling problem he barely hides. Kids hear the word casino and think nothing of it. Adults hear it and immediately picture Stan at 3 in the morning in a dim room full of strangers feeding quarters into a machine. The fandom has built a whole theory around Stan's relationship with money and gambling. People point to lines like the casino mutter and the tax joke from the pilot as evidence that Stan was meant to be read as a man with serious financial problems and possibly an addiction. The show never says it out loud, but the hints are there in almost every episode. We will come back to Stan's money problems later when we talk about the Mr. Mystery title and the lawsuits he mentions in passing. For now, just notice that even in the second episode of a Disney show, the writers were planting seeds about adult vices, headhunters, and the wax figure decapitation jokes. The third episode of the show is called Headhunters, and it aired on July 13, 2012. This is the episode where Stan unveils a museum of wax figures inside the Mystery Shack, and then someone chops the head off of Wax Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the night. The whole episode is a murder mystery parody, and the writers use the murder mystery format as an excuse to slip in jokes about death that are way darker than anything you would normally see on a kids channel. Early in the episode, Stan reveals that his secret collection of wax figures has been locked in a storage room for years. He says he was saving them for a special occasion. When he opens the door, the figures are covered in cobwebs, and one of them falls forward and lands on its face. Stan barely reacts, he just props it back up and keeps talking. The joke is about a man who has been hoarding human-shaped objects in a closet for decades and never thought twice about it. That is the kind of thing you would see on a true crime documentary. A guy with a room full of mannequins he refuses to throw away. The show plays it as quirky, but the actual visual is unsettling. Then there is the wax figure of Larry King himself. Larry King was a real talk show host who was still alive when this episode aired. The show made a wax figure of him and gave him a speaking role. At one point, his wax head gets separated from his body and continues to talk. He keeps making jokes about being a head. He says things like he has been on the air for so long, he barely needs a body anymore. The joke is about how Larry King looked old and frail in his later years. The show is essentially saying he was already half dead. That kind of joke about a real living person would never fly on a kids show today. But in 2012, the writers got away with it. The murder weapon in the episode turns out to be the wax figure of Sherlock Holmes. He confesses at the end. He says he killed Wax Lincoln because Lincoln was the most popular wax figure in the shack. The motive is jealousy. The murder is then resolved when Dipper and Mabel knock the wax figures into the sunlight and they all melt. They scream as they die. The screams sound human. The wax pools on the floor. Stan looks at the mess and says he is just glad he did not pay full price for the collection. The joke is about how Stan does not care that he just watched a room full of people scream and melt to death, because they were not real, and he saved money on them. The casual dismissal of a violent group death played for a laugh is the kind of dark humor that fans on forums have written essays about. People point to this episode as proof that the show was always willing to go to dark places when the joke was good enough. There is also a moment in Headhunters where Stan says he made the wax figures himself by melting down candles he stole from a church. The line about stealing from a church is a 1-second throwaway, but it tells you everything about Stan. He is the kind of man who steals religious property to make weird art projects in his attic. The fandom loves this line. It comes up in nearly every thread about Stan's morals and his backstory. The writers were telling you again and again that this man was a low-grade criminal who had no respect for institutions or rules. And they were telling you with jokes the hand that rocks the Mabel and the older boyfriend problem. The fourth episode is called The Hand That Rocks the Mabel, and it aired on July 20, 2012. This is the episode where Mabel falls under the spell of a child psychic named Lil Gideon, and the adult content in this one is heavier than the first 3 episodes combined. Gideon is presented as a 10-year-old boy with a giant blonde pompadour and a fake southern accent. He runs a tent revival show in town, where he claims to have psychic powers. He uses the show to scam his audience out of money. Adults watching the show immediately recognize the type. Kids just see a weird small boy with big hair. But the writers were clearly making fun of a very specific kind of religious con artist. Once Gideon meets Mabel, he becomes obsessed with her. He invites her to a fancy dinner. He buys her gifts. He sings her love songs. He talks about marrying her. Now remember, Mabel is 12 years old. Gideon is also a child, but the way he pursues her is exactly how a grown man would pursue a woman. He uses adult dating tactics. He love bombs her. He acts possessive. When she tries to break up with him, he refuses to accept it and tries to manipulate her into staying with him. The whole episode is a parody of stalker behavior and abusive relationships. The fact that the abuser is 10 years old does not soften the message. It actually makes it more pointed. The writers were showing you that controlling behavior starts young, and that some men learn early how to manipulate women. There is a scene where Gideon takes Mabel into his special tent and shows her his collection of locks of her hair. He has been stealing pieces of her hair without her knowing. He keeps them in a small case. He looks at them and sighs. The joke is about a stalker who collects pieces of his victim. That is something you see on Law & Order. That is something you see in true crime documentaries. The fact that a kid's show in 2012 put this in an episode and played it as a comedic beat is something the fandom has written about extensively. People on forums have called this scene one of the darkest jokes in the entire series, and it is not even in the top 10. Dipper eventually has to physically fight Gideon at the end of the episode. He punches him. Gideon falls. Mabel breaks up with him for good, but Gideon is not done. He becomes a recurring villain for the rest of Season 1. He is the main antagonist of the Season 1 finale. The writers used him as a way to keep talking about con artists, manipulation, and abusive men throughout the show. Every time Gideon shows up, the jokes get a little darker. We will come back to him later when we talk about his prison arc in Season 2. Yes, there is a prison arc for a 10-year-old. That is the kind of show Gravity Falls was, the inconveniencing and the teen drinking joke. The 5th episode is called The Inconveniencing, and it aired on July 27, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper sneaks off with Wendy and her older teenage friends to hang out at an abandoned convenience store called the Dusk 2 Dawn. The store is haunted by the ghosts of 2 old shopkeepers who died of fright when teenagers danced in their store. The episode is a parody of slacker teen movies from the 1990s like Empire Records and Clerks. Early in the episode, Wendy's friend Lee mentions that they are going to the Dusk 2 Dawn to party. The word party in this context is teen code for drinking. Wendy is 15. Her friends are around the same age. They are not old enough to drink legally, but the episode never says they are not drinking. It just shows them goofing around in an abandoned store. Adults watching know exactly what kind of party teenagers throw in an abandoned building at night. Kids watching just see them play with old store products and have a good time. The joke is in what the writers do not show. There is a moment where one of Wendy's friends, Nate, drinks something out of an old bottle he finds in the store. He immediately starts gagging and spits it out. The bottle is unmarked. He just trusted that it was something he could drink. The joke is about a teenager who drinks unidentified liquids at parties without thinking. That is a behavior pattern that leads to alcohol poisoning, drug overdoses, and worse. The show plays it for laughs because Nate is fine. But the underlying joke is about teenagers being reckless with substances they cannot identify. Dipper also tries to impress Wendy in this episode by drinking a giant cup of Pit Cola and pretending it does not affect him. He immediately gets a sugar rush and starts acting hyperactive. The joke is a parody of teen movies where the nerdy kid tries to drink alcohol with the cool kids and gets drunk on his first sip. Dipper is 12, so the show cannot literally have him drink, so they made it caffeine and sugar instead. But the framing of the scene, the way Dipper holds the cup, the way the older teens watch him with amused expressions, all of it is borrowed from movies about teen drinking. The writers translated an adult joke into a kid-friendly visual without losing the meaning. The fandom has pointed this out many times. People have made side-by-side videos comparing the scene to actual scenes from R-rated movies. The framing is identical. The only thing that changed was the beverage. At the end of the episode, Wendy tells Dipper that he is one of the cool kids now. She says he held his own. The line is meant to be a sweet moment between them, but the subtext is that Dipper proved he could hang with older teens who were doing things he was too young for. That is the kind of validation that real kids chase when they want to fit in with older crowds. And the show is saying that Dipper got it. The episode ends with him feeling proud of himself. But anyone who has ever been the youngest in a group of teenagers knows that feeling, and they know what usually comes next. The show never goes there, but the seed is planted. Chunk 3 of 9. Dipper versus Manliness and the Manitar Locker Room Jokes. The 6th episode of Season 1 is called Dipper versus Manliness, and it aired on August 10, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper goes deep into the woods and finds a tribe of creatures called Manitors, who agree to teach him how to be a man. The Manitors are giant, muscular, minotaur-looking beasts with deep voices and chest hair so thick it looks like sweaters. The episode is a parody of toxic masculinity, gym culture, and the kind of men who measure their worth in bench press numbers. The Manitors live in a cave they call the Man Cave. The cave is filled with weights, raw meat, and posters of cars. The leader of the Manitors is named Leaderor. There are other Manitors named Schutzpar, Pubertar, and Testosteror. Yes, Pubertar and Testosteror. Those names made it into a Disney show. The joke is that the Manitors are so obsessed with masculinity that they have named themselves after the hormones and life stages that define being a man. An adult hears Pubertar and immediately thinks about the awkward bodily changes of becoming a teenager. They hear Testosterone and think about the hormone that drives male aggression and sex drive. The names are not subtle. The writers were laughing at toxic masculinity by putting the actual biological terms right in the characters' names. When Dipper enters the man cave, the Manitars immediately start asking him invasive questions. They ask him if he has hair on his chest yet. They ask him if his voice has dropped. They ask him if he has ever shaved. Dipper is 12. The questions are essentially about puberty milestones. The Manitors are grown male creatures asking a preteen boy about his body. On any other show, this would be uncomfortable. On Gravity Falls, it is played as comedy because the Manitars are dumb and overly enthusiastic. But the underlying joke is about how older men sometimes interrogate younger boys about their masculinity in ways that are inappropriate. Locker room talk between adult men and teenage boys. The show is making fun of that culture by exaggerating it to the point of absurdity. There's a scene where the Manitors make Dipper do a series of trials to prove his manhood. One of the trials is called the Challenge of Aging. Another is the Challenge of Standing Still and Enduring Tickling. The tickling trial sounds innocent, but the visual of grown muscular men tickling a small child to test his endurance has a weird energy to it. Adults pick up on the strange undertone immediately. The writers knew exactly what they were doing. The final trial in the episode is for Dipper to defeat the Multi-Bear. The Multi-Bear is a creature with multiple bear heads who lives alone in a cave. When Dipper finds him, the multi-bear turns out to be a gentle soul who just wants to listen to his favorite music. He plays a song from the band Baba, which is a parody of the real band ABBA. The multi-bear says Baba is his guilty pleasure. He says he loves their music even though the Manitors would mock him for it. The joke here is a parody of men who hide their love of disco and pop music because other men would call them feminine. The multi-bear is essentially a coded character. The multi-bear is meant to represent a gay man who hides his identity from his macho friends. The show never confirms it, but the parallels are obvious. He lives alone. He loves a band associated with gay culture. He keeps it secret because the dominant male culture would shame him for it. Dipper ends up bonding with him over the music and refuses to kill him. The Manitars banish Dipper for being too sensitive. The episode ends with Dipper deciding that real manliness is about being yourself and not about meeting other people's standards. The whole episode is a queer-coded story about the pressure to perform a certain kind of masculinity. People have called it one of the most progressive episodes in the show, and it aired on Disney in 2012. The writers slipped a whole queer parable past the censors by dressing it up as a joke about a boy and some muscle-bound beast men. That is the kind of writing that made Gravity Falls a cult classic. Double Dipper and the Clone Pool Party jokes. The 7th episode is called Double Dipper, and it aired on August 17, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper discovers a copy machine in the Mystery Shack basement that can make clones of any living thing. He uses it to make multiple copies of himself, so he can try to dance with Wendy at the Mystery Shack pool party, where the protagonist has multiple selves trying to achieve the same goal. The pool party itself is a setup for a lot of adult-coded humor. The episode takes place at a teen pool party, with music, dancing, and flirting. Wendy is wearing a swimsuit. Her teenage friends are all there in their swimsuits. The camera pans across the pool deck several times during the episode. It is the closest the show ever got to showing bodies in a sexualized context. The writers were careful to keep things age-appropriate, but the framing of the scene, the music choices, the way the teens are interacting with each other, all of it is borrowed from teen movies that were definitely not for kids. Stan is at the pool party in his role as Mr. Mystery. He is wearing a swimsuit that is short and tight. He is trying to chat up an older woman who is sunbathing. The woman is not interested. Stan keeps trying. He says things like he has been told he has a body like a Greek statue. The joke is about an older man who has no self-awareness about his own attractiveness. He is hitting on a stranger in a swimsuit and getting rejected and not noticing. That is a comedy beat from countless adult sitcoms. The Mary Tyler Moore Show did this. Cheers did this. Seinfeld did this. The show is borrowing from a long tradition of jokes about delusional older men at pool parties. There is a moment where one of Dipper's clones, named Tyrone, has a long conversation with the original Dipper about strategy. Tyrone and Dipper are essentially the same person, but they end up disagreeing. They have a heart-to-heart talk by a tree. Tyrone tells Dipper that he understands him better than anyone because he is him. The scene is touching, but there is a weird undercurrent to it. Dipper is essentially having a deep emotional conversation with himself. That Dipper is so socially isolated that the only person who really gets him is his own clone. That is the kind of dark joke that hits adults harder than kids. Lonely children do imagine versions of themselves to talk to. The show is putting that experience on screen and playing it as comedy. Wendy spends most of the episode hanging out with Robbie, the older teen who plays guitar. Robbie is essentially her boyfriend material. He is moody. He wears a hoodie. He plays sad songs. The joke is that Robbie is a parody of every emo boyfriend. The show makes fun of him constantly. His band is called Robbie V and the Tombstones. His songs are about how everyone has misunderstood him. Adults watching this episode recognize the type immediately. Kids just see a guy in a hoodie. At one point in the episode, Robbie corners Wendy and tries to get her to commit to him. He acts possessive. He talks about how they should be exclusive. Wendy looks uncomfortable. The scene is short, but it is one of several throughout the show, where Robbie is shown to have controlling tendencies. The fandom has written about Robbie as a portrait of a manipulative teen boyfriend. He never crosses into being a true villain, but he is constantly shown to be the kind of guy who pressures his girlfriend in small ways. The show is using him to comment on a certain kind. Kids do not pick up on it, but anyone who has been in a relationship like that recognizes Robbie immediately. The episode ends with all of Dipper's clones getting destroyed in the rain. They dissolve back into paper because they are made from copies. Dipper holds Tyrone in his arms as he melts away. Tyrone's last words are a joke about wanting to eat a stale jelly bean. The melting clone with the dying words is a direct parody of every dramatic death scene. The show is making fun of melodramatic death scenes, while also actually delivering a melodramatic death scene. That layered joke is the kind of thing the writers were doing constantly throughout the series. The writers were geniuses. Irrational Treasure and the government conspiracy jokes. The 8th episode is called Irrational Treasure, and it aired on August 24, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper and Mabel discover that the founder of Gravity Falls was a man named Quentin Tremblay, who was the 8th president of the United States. The episode is a parody of National Treasure and conspiracy theory documentaries. The joke at the heart of the episode is that the United States government has been hiding the existence of an entire president from the public for over 100 years. Quentin Tremblay was supposedly removed from all official records because he was considered too embarrassing to acknowledge. He appointed babies to his cabinet. He declared war on pancakes. He preserved himself in peanut brittle. The joke is about how governments hide things they do not want the public to know. The show is making fun of conspiracy theorists by giving them an actual conspiracy that turns out to be real. But the underlying message is that you cannot trust official histories. The government does hide things. Documents are sometimes destroyed. People are sometimes erased from records. Kids watching this episode just see a silly story about a goofy president. Adults watching see a commentary on how history is written by the winners and how inconvenient facts often get buried. There is a scene where Dipper and Mabel break into a government archive building to find evidence of Tremblay's existence. They sneak past security. They steal documents. They commit several federal crimes in the span of about 3 minutes. The episode plays it as a fun adventure, but the actual content is 2 children breaking into a federal facility and removing classified materials. That is not the kind of thing you should be teaching kids. Is fine to do. The show plays it for laughs in this single episode than most adults commit in a lifetime. Stan also appears in the episode and gets arrested. For being a confidence man, the police officer reads his rap sheet out loud, and the list is long. It includes things like face fraud and various other invented crimes. The joke is that Stan is so prolific a criminal that the police had to invent new categories of crime to describe what he does. Kids hear the list and laugh because the words sound silly. Adults hear the list and realize the show is telling them that Stan has been a career criminal for decades. The show is dropping huge hints about Stan's past in throwaway lines. Most kids miss it, and written long forum posts about what each one might mean. The episode ends with Dipper and Mabel finding Tremblay still alive, preserved in peanut brittle in a cave under the town. He grants them an official presidential pardon for any crimes they have committed or will commit in their lifetimes. The pardon is signed and stamped. They use it to get Stan out of jail. The show is making fun of how American presidents. Kids do not know about this. Adults do. The writers were commenting on real political behavior, using a goofy children's adventure as cover. That is the level of writing Gravity Falls was operating at. Every episode had a layer for kids and a layer for adults, and the adult layer was often sharper than anything you would see on a primetime sitcom. The 9th episode is called The Time Traveler's Pig, and it aired on September 7, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper and Mabel get hold of a time travel device from a man named Blendon Blandon, who is from the future. Dipper wants to use it to undo a moment of embarrassment in front of Wendy. Mabel wants to use it to save her pet pig Waddles. The episode is a parody of time loop movies like Groundhog Day. The whole premise of the episode is that Dipper keeps reliving the same day over and over trying to get Wendy to notice him romantically. He tries hundreds of strategies. He fails every time. The joke is about how desperate young men become when they want a girl to like them. They obsess, they plan, they rehearse, they try every angle. The show plays this for laughs by speeding up the montage of Dipper's failures, but the underlying message is darker. The show is essentially making a joke about how stalker behavior often starts as obsessive crushing. Dipper is not a stalker, he is a kid with a crush. But the time loop format lets the writers explore what it would look like if a person could try infinite strategies on one target. That is what a stalker does. The fandom has had long discussions about this episode and what it implies about Dipper's mental state. Most people agree that the show is gently warning against this kind of fixation while also making it funny. There is a scene where Wendy is shown spending time with Robbie at the fair. They are riding rides together. They are sharing food. They look like a couple. Dipper sees them and feels devastated. He goes back in time to try to prevent it. He does it many times. Each time, no matter what he does, Wendy ends up with Robbie. The joke is that some things are meant to happen, and you cannot change them. But there is also a darker joke buried in there. The show is saying that no matter how hard you try, you cannot make someone love you who does not love you. That is a hard truth that most kids do not understand. Adults understand it deeply. The show is delivering a piece of romantic wisdom that hits harder the older you get. Mabel's storyline in the episode involves her trying to save Waddles from being taken away by Pacifica's father. In the original timeline, Pacifica wins the pig, and Mabel loses him. Mabel uses the time machine to change the outcome, but every change she makes causes Dipper to lose his chance with Wendy. The episode forces Mabel to choose between her brother's happiness and her own. She eventually chooses the pig. Dipper accepts it because he loves his sister. The ending is touching, but the underlying joke is about how families have to make impossible choices about whose dreams matter more. The show is putting a real family dynamic on screen and playing it through the lens of time travel comedy. Kids see a sister who saved her pet. Adults see a sibling relationship where one person has to swallow their pain so the other can be happy. That is a heavy theme for a kids show. The episode also features Blendin Blandin himself. He is a time agent from the year 207,012 who came back to the present to fix anomalies in the timeline. He is bald, bumbling, and constantly losing his time machine. He becomes a recurring character throughout the show. His name itself is a joke, Blendin. Blandin sounds like blending in and being bland. The show is making fun of the kind of forgettable nobody character that you find in every time travel movie. He is the guy who is supposed to keep the timeline safe, and he is terrible at his job. The fandom has theorized that Blendin represents how the universe runs on incompetence at every level. Even the people in charge of time itself are bad at their jobs. That is a darkly funny worldview for a Disney show to promote. The 10th episode is called Fight Fighters, and it aired on September 14, 2012. This is the episode where Dipper challenges Robbie to a fight after Robbie steals Wendy from him. To prepare, Dipper plays a fighting arcade game called Fight Fighters and accidentally summons one of the characters, a fighter named Rumble McSkirmish, into the real world. The episode is a parody of Street Fighter and the arcade fighting game genre of the 1990s. The whole premise of the episode is that Dipper wants to commit violence against another person and recruits a video game character to do it for him. The joke is about how video games supposedly teach children to be violent. The episode is making fun of the moral panic about violent video games that defined the 1990s and early 2000s. Politicians used to claim that games like Mortal Kombat would turn kids into killers. The show is parodying that by literally having a video game character come to life and try to kill someone. The writers are commenting on the absurdity of the moral panic by taking it to its logical extreme. Kids who watched the episode just saw a fun action plot. Adults who watched it recognized the parody of decades of cultural debate about media and violence. Rumble McSkirmish himself is a parody of Ryu and Ken from Street Fighter. He is muscular, blonde, and only speaks in fighting game catchphrases. He has a dramatic backstory about his father being killed by his arch-enemy. The backstory is exactly the kind of overwrought melodrama that fighting games use to motivate their characters. The show is making fun of how silly video game stories are, but the joke goes deeper. Rumble takes his backstory seriously. He believes his father is really dead. He is in real emotional pain. The fandom has pointed out that Rumble is essentially a character who exists only to fight and grieve. The show is making a comment on how video games create characters whose entire purpose is suffering and violence. That is a dark observation about an entire entertainment medium. There is a scene where Dipper has Rumble chase Robbie through town. Robbie is genuinely terrified. He runs through alleys. He climbs onto the water tower. Rumble is throwing fireballs and kicks at him. Dipper realizes that he might actually get Robbie killed. He has a moment of moral reckoning. He realizes that wanting to hurt someone in your head is very different from actually watching them get hurt in real life. The joke ends here, and the lesson begins. The episode is teaching kids that violent fantasies are normal, but acting on them is not. That is a mature lesson for a kids' show. It is essentially the same message that anger management therapy delivers to adults. The show is sneaking therapy into a kids' cartoon by way of a fighting game parody. The episode ends with Rumble being defeated and returned to his game. Robbie survives. Dipper apologizes to Wendy for trying to fight her boyfriend over a misunderstanding. Wendy forgives him but tells him that she does not want him to fight people for her honor. The line is delivered as a casual comment, but the meaning is heavy. Wendy is essentially telling Dipper that she does not need a man to defend her, and that performative violence in her name is not romantic. That is a feminist message wrapped in a one-liner. The fandom has written about this scene as one of the moments where the show clearly states that Wendy is not the kind of woman who wants to be a prize that men fight over. She is her own person. Dipper takes the lesson to heart. The episode ends with him understanding her better. The adult joke here is that growing up means learning that women are not trophies. Most teen boys take years to learn this lesson. Dipper learns it in 22 minutes. The 11th episode is called Little Dipper, and it aired on November 9, 2012. This is the episode where Mabel teases Dipper for being shorter than her, and Dipper becomes so insecure about his height that he uses crystals from the forest to grow taller. The episode is a parody of the entire genre of jokes about short men, and it goes harder on those jokes than most adult sitcoms would dare. The joke at the heart of the episode is that being a short man is supposedly a humiliating thing in modern culture. Dipper is mocked for his height by Mabel, by Gideon, and by random people in town. He becomes obsessed with his stature. He measures himself constantly. He wears shoes with inserts. He stands on tiptoes. The show is parodying every man who has ever felt insecure about his height. The fandom has had many discussions about this episode. People who are short themselves have written about how the episode captures the experience perfectly. The jokes are mean, the mocking is relentless, and the show is essentially saying that this is what short men go through every day. Kids watching the episode just see a funny story about magic crystals. Adults who are short watch it and feel a twinge of recognition. The show was making a serious point about a real form of body insecurity that affects millions of men. Gideon plays a major role in this episode. He returns as the villain. He uses crystals to shrink Dipper and Mabel down to a few inches tall. He then traps them in a hamster cage and gloats. The visual of two children being trapped in a cage by another child is unsettling on its face. But the writers play it as comedy. Gideon talks to them like a man talking to his prisoners. He says he is going to make them his eternal pets. The line about being eternal pets has a creepy adult undertone. It is essentially a kidnapper's monologue, but the actual content is dark. Gideon is a child threatening to keep other children captive forever. The fandom has discussed how this episode shows that Gideon is essentially a budding sociopath. The show is laying the groundwork for him to become a major villain in the second half of the season. There is also a subplot in the episode involving Stan and the IRS. Stan gets audited and has to deal with a tax inspector who comes to the Mystery Shack to go through his books. Stan tries everything to hide his fraud. He distracts the inspector with shiny objects. He moves files around. He lies about expenses. The joke is about how small business owners often cook their books to avoid paying taxes. Stan is the worst possible version of this. He is openly committing tax fraud in front of a federal agent. The show plays it for laughs because Stan is bumbling and the inspector is too dumb to catch him. But the underlying joke is about how tax fraud is rampant in small businesses and how the IRS is often understaffed to catch it. The show is making it as a throwaway gag in an episode about a boy with height insecurity. The episode ends with Dipper accepting his height. He realizes that what matters is who he is, not how tall he is. Mabel apologizes for teasing him. The siblings make up. The lesson is sweet, but the journey to get there involved jokes about kidnapping, body dysmorphia, tax fraud, and child villains. That is the range that Gravity Falls operated at. Every episode could touch on 5 different adult themes and still end with a heartwarming family moment. The writers were doing something special, and the audience is still discovering new jokes more than a decade later. Chunk 5 of 9, Summerween and the Candy Trauma Jokes. The 12th episode is called Summerween, and it aired on October 5, 2012. This is the episode where the town of Gravity Falls celebrates Halloween in the middle of summer. Because the people there love Halloween so much, they invented a second one. Dipper and Mabel go trick-or-treating and end up being hunted by a creature called the Summerween Trickster, who is made entirely of unwanted candy. The episode is a parody of slasher movies and Halloween horror traditions. The whole concept of Summerween is itself an adult joke. The idea is that there is a town so obsessed with one holiday that they made a second version of it months early. The fandom has joked that Summerween is essentially a metaphor for retail capitalism. Stores in real life start putting out Christmas decorations in September. They start selling Halloween candy in August. The town of Gravity Falls is just the logical conclusion of that trend. They have given up pretending and now openly celebrate Halloween twice. The joke is about how consumer culture has destroyed the meaning of holidays by stretching them out across the calendar. Kids watching the episode just think Summerween is a cool made-up holiday. Adults recognize it as commentary on how every season is now Christmas season at Walmart. The Summerween Trickster is the villain of the episode. He is a creature made entirely of the candy that no one wants. He hunts down children who throw away bad candy because he is offended that anyone would reject sugar. His backstory is that he was born from the rejected candy of generations of trick-or-treaters. The joke is that this creature is a manifestation of food waste guilt. He punishes children for being picky eaters. The fandom has pointed out that the trickster is essentially a horror movie monster built around a parenting message. Eat your vegetables, or the Candyman will get you. The show is taking the moral panic about candy and turning it into an actual monster. Adults laugh because they remember their parents warning them not to waste food. Kids watch it as a scary story. There is a moment in the episode where the trickster eats one of the trick-or-treaters in front of Dipper and Mabel. He literally consumes a child. The child screams as he goes down. Dipper and Mabel watch in horror. The kid is gone. The show plays it as a comedic horror beat, but the actual content is a child being eaten alive by a monster. That kind of thing would never make it into a Disney show today. In 2012, the writers got away with it because the kid was minor and the death was bloodless. But the fandom has pointed to this scene many times as evidence that Gravity Falls was darker than its network was probably comfortable with. The writers were pushing limits constantly, and this scene is one of the most clear examples. The trickster also has a habit of speaking in deep, gravelly tones about how he was rejected and how he had to make himself from scraps. His monologue is essentially the monologue of every villain who was once a victim. The joke is about how horror movies often give their monsters tragic backstories to make them feel sympathetic. The trickster is a parody of that whole tradition. He is asking the kids to feel bad for him while he is trying to eat them. The fandom has joked that the trickster is the most relatable villain in the show, because he is essentially a parable about how the food industry creates products that no one wants, and then guilts consumers for not buying them. That is a very specific kind of adult joke that almost no kid would catch. Mabel's storyline in the episode involves her trying to prove she is mature enough to keep trick-or-treating. Even though Dipper thinks they have outgrown it, she insists that she is still a kid at heart and that no one should ever stop celebrating childhood. The message is sweet, but there is a layer of sadness underneath it. The fandom has discussed how Mabel's resistance to growing up becomes a major theme in Season 2. She is terrified of leaving childhood behind. She wants summer to last forever. This episode is the first place where that theme really starts. Adults watching can see the foreshadowing immediately. They know that Mabel is going to spend the rest of the show fighting against the inevitability of time, and they know that fight is one she cannot win. Boss Mabel and the workplace power dynamic jokes. The 13th episode is called Boss Mabel, and it aired on October 19, 2012. This is the episode where Mabel takes over the Mystery Shack for 3 days, while Stan leaves on a trip to win a prize from a TV show. The episode is a parody of corporate office comedies, like The Office and Office Space. The whole premise of the episode is that Mabel wants to prove that being nice to employees is more effective than being mean to them. Stan runs the shack with a cruel hand. He overworks Wendy, he underpays Suze, he yells at customers. He cuts every corner he can find. The joke is that Stan is essentially the worst boss in America. He is the kind of small business owner who treats his employees like garbage and gets away with it because they need the job. The fandom has had long discussions about Stan as a labor villain. People have written about how the Mystery Shack would have been shut down by labor regulators if it existed in the real world. The show is making fun of small business culture by exaggerating Stan's behavior to comedic extremes. But the underlying critique is real. Many small businesses do exploit their workers. Many bosses do act like Stan. The show is putting that on screen and laughing at it. When Mabel takes over, she tries to be the opposite of Stan. She gives Wendy and Suze free time. She lets them dress how they want. She pays them in compliments. The shack starts losing money. Customers complain. The whole operation falls apart. The joke is that being too nice is also bad for business. The episode is essentially making a centrist argument that the best boss is somewhere between Stan's cruelty and Mabel's softness. That is a real management theory that gets discussed in business schools. The show is putting it into a kid's cartoon as a punchline. Adults who have worked in offices recognize the dynamic immediately. Kids just see Mabel learning a lesson. There is a scene where Wendy takes advantage of Mabel's leniency by doing absolutely nothing all day. She lies on the counter. She eats chips. She paints her nails. She watches videos on her phone. The visual is essentially every meme about lazy retail workers. The show is making fun of how teenagers treat their summer jobs. The fandom loves this scene because it captures the universal experience of being a teen worker who hates their job and only does the bare minimum. Adults who manage teenagers in their careers recognize Wendy as every single one of those workers. The show is roasting an entire generation of summer employees in one sequence. Suze has a different reaction to Mabel's management style. He starts working harder because he wants to please her. He invents new attractions. He fixes broken exhibits. He puts in extra hours. The joke is that Suze is the kind of worker who responds to kindness with loyalty. He is the dream employee that every boss wishes they had. The fandom has discussed Suze as the most pure-hearted character in the show. He is the rare employee who actually loves his job and wants to do it well. The contrast between Suze and Wendy is the contrast between two kinds of workers that every small business has. Adults who have been on either side of that divide understand the dynamic immediately. Meanwhile, Stan goes on his trip and competes on a game show called Cash Wheel. The host is a parody of every smarmy game show host from the 1970s and 1980s. He insults the contestants. He flirts with the female ones. He wears a polyester suit. The joke is about how game show hosts of that era were often sleazy older men who used the show as a way to harass people on national television. The fandom has joked that the host is essentially a parody of Chuck Barris from The Gong Show. The show is making fun of an entire era of television that adults remember but kids have never seen. The reference flies completely over the heads of children watching. Adults laugh because they know exactly who is being parodied. Stan loses the game show because he is too greedy. He keeps spinning the wheel when he should have stopped. The lesson is that greed will cost you everything. That is a moral that adults have heard 1,000 times in business contexts. The show is delivering it through a goofy plot about a fictional game show. But the lesson lands. Stan returns home to find the shack in chaos. He realizes that his way of running things was actually the right way. Mabel admits that being a boss is harder than it looks. The siblings make peace. The episode ends with everyone agreeing that running a small business is impossible. That is essentially the thesis of every American sitcom about small business ownership. The show is saying it in a kid's cartoon, and the joke lands. Bottomless Pit and the unreliable narrator jokes. The 14th episode is called Bottomless Pit, and it aired on February 15, 2013. This is an anthology episode where Dipper, Mabel, Suze, and Stan tell each other scary stories, while falling down an actual bottomless pit in the forest. The episode is a parody of anthology horror shows like Tales from the Crypt. The framing device of the episode is itself a joke. The characters are falling through a pit that has no bottom. They have nothing to do but talk, so they tell stories to pass the time. that used framing devices to string together unrelated stories. The show is essentially making fun of lazy storytelling traditions by using one to deliver 4 short tales. Adults recognize the format immediately. Kids just see the characters falling. The show is paying tribute to 100 years of pulp fiction in a single throwaway plot device. Dipper's story in the episode is about his voice cracking and turning into a deep masculine voice that he cannot control. He uses a magic potion to change his voice. The potion works, but the side effects make him sound like a grown man. The joke is about puberty and the awkwardness of voice changes. Every boy who has gone through puberty knows the experience of having a voice crack at the worst possible moment. The show is taking that universal experience and dramatizing it through a magic potion. Adults laugh because they remember the embarrassment. Kids who have not hit puberty yet just think it sounds funny. Kids who are going through it right now recognize themselves immediately. The show is delivering a coming-of-age joke through a fantasy plot device. Mabel's story is about her trying to prank Stan by replacing his contact lenses with stronger ones. The prank goes wrong and Stan ends up seeing strange things everywhere. The joke is about how pranks on family members often go too far. Adults who have ever pranked a sibling know the feeling of realizing you went too far and panicking. The show is putting that experience on screen and playing it for laughs. The fandom has discussed Mabel's prank arc as evidence that she has a slightly cruel streak that the show acknowledges but never fully addresses. She is mostly a sweet character, but she does have moments of meanness. This episode is one of them. Soos's story is about him trying to ride a roller coaster and being thwarted by his own size. He is too big for the coaster's safety bar. The ride operator refuses to let him on. Soos becomes determined to fit. He tries every diet. He tries every exercise. He fails every time. The joke is about how amusement parks discriminate against people who are bigger. That is a real issue that has been discussed in news articles and in body positivity forums. The show is making fun of it gently, but the underlying message is sympathetic. Soos is presented as a victim of an industry that does not accommodate his body. The fandom has written about how Soos's storylines often touch on weight and self-esteem in ways that other kids' shows avoid. The show treats him with respect even when it is laughing at his situation. That is a delicate balance, and the writers nailed it. Stan's story is about his memories of growing up with his brother Ford. The story is short. It is mostly played for laughs. But it is also the first time the show really hints at the existence of Stan's twin brother. The fandom has gone back to this episode many times to point out the foreshadowing. The show was planting seeds for the big twist in Season 2 as early as Season 1. Adults watching the episode the first time might catch a few hints. Adults rewatching the episode after seeing Season 2 notice every single line. The writers were building a long con, and the payoff is one of the best in the entire show. We will get to it in detail when we cover Stan's full backstory later in this script. End of Chunk 5. Ready when you are. Chunk 6 of 9. The Deep End and the Lifeguard Romance Jokes. The 15th episode is called The Deep End, and it aired on July 19, 2013. This is the episode where Mabel falls in love with a strange boy named Mermando, who turns out to be a merman trapped in the kiddie pool at the public swimming hole. The episode is a parody of summer romance movies and lifeguard culture. The whole storyline of Mabel and Mermando is an adult joke disguised as a kid's cartoon. Mermando is a half-fish, half-human creature with the upper body of a handsome man and the lower body of a fish. He speaks with a heavy accent. He sings romantic songs. He has long, flowing hair. He is essentially a parody of every romantic male lead in every telenovela ever made. The joke is that Mabel has fallen for a soap opera character who happens to also be a fish from the waist down. The fandom has had endless discussions about the biology of this situation. People have asked the obvious question about how a relationship with a merman would even work physically. The show never addresses it, but the writers clearly knew what they were doing. They put a 12-year-old girl in a romance with a fishman and let the audience fill in the uncomfortable blanks. There is a scene where Mabel gives Mermando mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to save his life. The scene is framed as a heroic medical moment, but the visual is a 12-year-old girl pressing her lips to the lips of an adult-looking man who happens to be a fish. The fandom has debated this scene for years. Some people see it as innocent, others see it as the writers pushing the boundary of what was acceptable on Disney Channel. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. They were parodying that trope by putting it in a context where it became impossible to ignore. Adults watch the scene and feel uncomfortable. Kids watch it and think Mabel is saving a friend. The discomfort is the joke. Meanwhile, Dipper spends the episode trying to defeat a tyrannical lifeguard named Mr. Poolcheck. Poolcheck is a parody of every aggressive authority figure who takes a low-paying job way too seriously. He blows his whistle constantly. He yells at children for splashing. He patrols the pool like a prison guard. The joke is about how some people in service jobs use their tiny amount of power to dominate everyone around them. The fandom has compared Poolcheck to mall cops, parking enforcement officers, and TSA agents. He is a parody of the entire culture of small authority gone wrong. Adults who have ever dealt with a power-tripping employee at a public facility recognize him immediately. Kids just see a funny man with a whistle. Suze has a side plot in the episode where he becomes obsessed with melting an ice pack he has been trying to thaw for years. The whole subplot is essentially nothing. Suze just stares at an ice pack waiting for it to melt. The joke is about how some people have weirdly specific obsessions that nobody else cares about. The fandom loves the subplot because it is so pointless it becomes hilarious. Suze eventually melts the ice pack at the end of the episode in a triumphant moment scored like a sports movie victory. The contrast between the high-stakes music and the low-stakes action is the joke. The show is making fun of how everyone treats their own goals as if they matter even when they do not. That is a piece of adult wisdom delivered through a man and an ice pack. The episode ends with Mermando being shipped off to a queen of the merpeople who wants to marry him for political reasons. Mabel is heartbroken. She writes letters to him in a bottle that she throws into the ocean. The ending is bittersweet, but there is a darker layer to it. The fandom has pointed out that Mabel is essentially being abandoned by a man who promised her commitment and then left for someone else. That is a romantic pattern that many adult women have experienced. The show is putting that experience on screen through the lens of a magical fish creature. The metaphor is heavy. Mabel learns that men who seem perfect are often unavailable. That is a lesson that takes most women years to learn. Mabel learns it at 12. Carpet Diem and the body swap identity jokes. The 16th episode is called Carpet Diem, and it aired on July 26, 2013. This is the episode where Dipper and Mabel discover a hidden room in the Mystery Shack that contains a magical carpet that swaps the bodies of anyone who shuffles their feet on it together and touches. The episode is a parody of body swap comedies like Freaky Friday. The genre is essentially about the discomfort of being in a body that is not yours. Adults watching body swap movies often wonder about the obvious uncomfortable implications. What do you do when you need to use the bathroom in someone else's body? What do you do if you have to bathe? Carpet Diem is no different. Dipper and Mabel swap bodies and immediately have to deal with the awkwardness of being in each other's anatomy. The episode mostly skips the obvious questions, but the fandom has talked endlessly about the implications. Twin body swaps are particularly weird because the twins know each other so well. The show plays it for laughs by having them constantly fight over the bathroom and the shower. Adults laugh because they understand the unspoken issues. Kids just think it is funny that they switched bodies. The episode also features Stan and Suze swapping bodies in a side plot. Stan ends up in Suze's body and immediately uses it to do physical labor he could not do in his own older body. Suze ends up in Stan's body and immediately gets confused by his own elderly experience. The joke is about how aging affects what you can do with your body. Stan envies Suze's youth. Suze cannot understand why Stan's back hurts so much. The show is making a comment on the universal experience of getting older. Adults watching the episode feel seen. They know what it is like to wish they had a younger body. Kids cannot relate yet, but they will someday. The show is planting a seed of empathy for older people that the audience will only really understand decades later. There is also a moment where Waddles the pig and Mabel end up swapping bodies briefly. Mabel ends up in the body of a pig. The pig ends up in the body of a 12-year-old girl. The joke is essentially the most absurd version of the body swap concept possible. A child and a pig. The fandom has had a lot of fun with this scene. People have written essays about what it means to put a human consciousness in a pig body. The implications are dark if you think about them. A human being trapped in an animal body that cannot communicate or do anything but eat slop. The show plays it as comedy, but the underlying horror is there if you look for it. The main plot of the episode involves Dipper and Mabel arguing over who should get a private room in the shack. They are tired of sharing space. They are growing apart as siblings often do as they approach their teen years. The joke is about how siblings stop wanting to be together as they get older. They want privacy. They want their own space. They want to be individuals instead of a pair. The show is putting a real developmental milestone on screen and playing it through the body swap plot. By the end of the episode, they realize they actually like sharing a room. The siblings reconcile. The lesson is sweet, but the underlying truth is that most siblings really do drift apart as they grow up. The show is offering a fantasy version of a sibling bond that is rare in real life. Adults who have lost touch with their own siblings watch this episode and feel a pang of regret. Kids watch it and feel hopeful about their own sibling relationships. The show works on both levels. Boys crazy and the boy band manipulation jokes. The 17th episode is called Boys Crazy, and it aired on August 2013. This is the episode where Mabel and her friends become obsessed with a boy band called Several Timez and try to free the band members from their manipulative manager. The episode is a parody of boy band culture and the music industry of the late 1990s and early 2000s. The whole storyline of Several Timez is itself a joke about the music industry. The band members turn out to be literal clones created in a lab by their manager to be the perfect pop stars. They have names like Chubby Z, Greggy C, Leggy P, Deep Chris, and Croonertron 3000. The joke is that boy bands are essentially manufactured products designed to appeal to teenage girls. The members are interchangeable. The personalities are scripted. The whole industry is about creating consumable male bodies for young women to project their fantasies onto. The fandom has written extensively about this episode as one of the sharpest critiques of pop music ever put in a kid's show. Adults who lived through the boy band era recognize every single beat. The show is essentially saying that NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys were just slightly less obviously manufactured versions of Several Timez. Kids watching the episode just see funny singers. Adults see a damning portrait of how the music industry exploits both performers and audiences. The manager of Several Timez is a parody of every shady music executive of the 1990s. He is overweight, sweaty, and dressed in a tacky suit. He keeps the band members locked in a cage when they are not performing. He feeds them peanuts. He treats them like livestock. The joke is that the music industry treats its artists like property. The show is taking a real industry abuse and turning it into a literal cage. The fandom has joked that the manager is based on Lou Pearlman, the real-life boy band manager, who created NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and was later imprisoned for running a massive Ponzi scheme. The show never names Pearlman, but the parallels are obvious. He was known for exploiting his artists financially and for keeping them under tight control. The show is essentially putting a Pearlman parody in a Disney cartoon and making fun of him without saying his name. When Mabel and her friends free the band members from their cage, they take them to a remote location to hide them. The band members immediately fall apart without their manager. They cannot make decisions. They cannot feed themselves. They cannot function as independent humans. The joke is about how manufactured pop stars often have no real-life skills because their entire existence has been controlled by handlers. Real boy band members have written memoirs about this experience. They have talked about how they did not know how to do laundry, pay bills, or buy groceries because everything was done for them. The show is putting that real phenomenon on screen and playing it as comedy. Adults who have read those memoirs recognize the truth immediately. Kids just laugh at the helpless singers. Mabel realizes that the band members are not capable of living on their own. She makes the difficult decision to return them to their manager because they cannot survive outside the cage. The ending is dark. It is essentially saying that some people are too damaged by exploitation to ever truly escape it. The fandom has called this one of the saddest endings in the entire show. Mabel learns that you cannot always save people. Sometimes the system that hurt them is the only system they know how to live in. That is a hard truth that most adults take decades to understand. The show is delivering it to a kids' audience in a boy band episode. The writers were not pulling punches. They were making real points about real industry abuses, and they were doing it in a kids' cartoon. Meanwhile, Dipper has a subplot in the same episode involving Wendy and Robbie. Dipper discovers that Robbie has been using subliminal messages in his music to brainwash Wendy into liking him. Dipper plays the song backwards and proves that Robbie literally embedded the words, "You will love me," in his guitar track. The joke is about every rock band that has ever been accused of putting satanic messages in their songs. The show is making fun of the moral panic about subliminal messages by having the messages actually be real. Robbie really did put a brainwashing command in his song. The fandom has discussed this scene as one of the most cynical moments in the show. The writers are essentially saying that some men really do try to manipulate women into loving them through any means available. Subliminal messages are just a metaphor. The actual behavior is real and common. The show is calling it out by making it literal. Adults laugh because they recognize the manipulation. Kids just think the backwards music is cool. End of Chunk 6. Ready when you are? Chunk 7 of 9, Land Before Swine and the Old Man Crisis jokes. The 18th episode is called Land Before Swine, and it aired on August 9, 2013. This is the episode where Waddles the pig gets kidnapped by a pterodactyl, and Stan has to help Mabel rescue him from a hidden valley full of dinosaurs that have been preserved in tree sap for millions of years. The whole emotional core of the episode is Stan trying to prove to Mabel that he loves her. Even though he has been mean to her pig, Stan keeps insulting Waddles throughout the episode. He calls him bacon. He calls him pork chop. He calls him future ham. The joke is essentially the classic dad joke about wanting to eat the family pet. Every father in every sitcom has made jokes about turning the family dog into a meal. The show is putting that tradition into a kids' cartoon. The fandom has discussed how Stan's jokes about Waddles are actually a form of affectionate teasing. He never actually tries to eat the pig, he just enjoys making Mabel angry. That is the kind of relationship dynamic that exists in many real families. There is a scene where Stan tells Mabel that when he was her age, he had a pet too. He says it was a parrot, and that he loved that parrot more than anything. He then says the parrot got eaten by something. He does not say what. He just trails off and looks sad. The joke is delivered with the timing of a dark comedy beat. The implication is that Stan watched his pet die in some horrible way when he was a child. The show never explains. The fandom has theorized for years about what happened to that parrot. Some people think Stan's father killed it. Some people think his brother Ford was involved. Some people think Stan himself accidentally caused its death. The show leaves it ambiguous, but the way Stan delivers the line tells you everything. It is the voice of a man who has lived with grief for 60 years. Adults pick up on the weight in his voice. Kids just hear a quick story about a bird. The dinosaurs in the episode are essentially comic relief. They are giant and dumb, and they keep getting confused by the small humans running around them. But there is one moment where a Tyrannosaurus Rex chases Stan and Mabel through the cave. Stan ends up having to fight the dinosaur with his bare hands to save Waddles. The scene is filmed like an action movie climax. An elderly man punching a Tyrannosaurus Rex in the face to save a pig. The fandom has called this one of the most cinematic moments in the show. It is also one of the most absurd. The joke is about how grandfathers in movies always have to prove their love through impossible physical feats. The show is putting Stan through the most extreme version of that trope. He literally cannot defeat a dinosaur, but he tries anyway. Mabel sees him try and realizes that he loves her. The moment is sweet, but it is also a parody of every action hero grandfather in every movie ever made. The episode ends with Stan and Mabel returning home with Waddles. Stan finally calls Waddles by his name instead of by a meat product. Mabel hugs him. The reconciliation is touching, but the underlying joke is about how older men often have to be forced into emotional connection through dramatic events. They do not naturally express love. They have to fight a dinosaur to admit they care. The fandom has discussed how this episode shows that Stan loves his family, but cannot say it directly. He shows it through actions. He shows it through grumpy concern. He shows it through risking his life, but he cannot just say the words. That is a portrait of a specific generation of men who were raised to never show feelings. The show is calling out that generational trauma in a goofy dinosaur plot. The writers were doing serious psychological work in a kid's cartoon, and most of the audience did not even notice. Dreamscaperers and the Mind Invasion jokes. The 19th episode is called Dreamscaperers, and it aired on August 12, 2013. This is the episode where Gideon hires a demon named Bill Cipher to enter Stan's mind and steal the combination to a safe that contains the deed to the Mystery Shack. The episode is the first appearance of Bill Cipher, who would go on to become the main villain of the entire series. Bill Cipher is essentially a walking adult joke. He is a triangle-shaped demon with one eye and a top hat. He floats. He has a high-pitched voice. He makes comments that range from charming to deeply disturbing. His first appearance in this episode sets the tone for everything that follows. He introduces himself by saying he has been watching the family for a long time. He says he knows their secrets. He says he can see into their dreams. The joke is essentially that Bill is a parody of every stalker entity in every horror movie. He is the demon who has been waiting in the shadows. He is the entity who knows what you did. He is the eye that sees everything. The show is making fun of the cosmic horror genre by putting its most iconic tropes into a triangle character with a goofy voice. The fandom has written endlessly about Bill as the most successful villain in animated history. Adults watch him and feel genuine unease. Kids find him funny and weird. Both reactions are correct. In his first scene, Bill makes a comment about pinball machines being human. He says pinball machines are people too, as a passing remark. The line makes no sense in context. It is just something Bill says. The fandom has spent years trying to figure out what it means. The most popular theory is that Bill is hinting that he has trapped human souls inside pinball machines, as part of some demonic deal. The implication is that there are people screaming inside arcade machines all over America. The show never explains, but the joke is dark. It is essentially saying that hell is real, and it might look like a Friday night at Chuck E. Cheese. The line is a perfect example of how Gravity Falls planted disturbing ideas in throwaway moments. Bill also has a habit of breaking the fourth wall and addressing the audience directly. He looks at the camera, he winks, he says things that only the viewers would understand. The fandom has cataloged every fourth wall moment in the show, and they all involve Bill. The joke is that Bill exists outside the narrative. He is aware that he is in a TV show. He is talking to those parents directly. The implication is that Bill is essentially the writers themselves. He is the voice of the people who made the show. He is the one who slipped all the adult jokes into the script and is now winking at the audience to acknowledge them. Adults who notice the fourth wall breaks feel like they have been let in on a secret. Kids see Bill turn to the camera and just think it looks cool. The episode itself involves Dipper, Mabel, and Soos entering Stan's mind to stop Bill from finding the safe combination. Stan's mind is a chaotic place filled with weird memories, dark thoughts, and bizarre images. The visual of his mental landscape is essentially a parody of every psychological thriller about exploring the human mind. The show is making fun of movies like Inception and What Dreams May Come by taking their visual style and applying it to a cranky old man's brain. The fandom loves the visuals in this episode. They have analyzed every background detail. They have noted every hidden image. The writers and animators packed Stan's mind with hints about his backstory that would only pay off in Season 2. Adults rewatching the episode after the Season 2 reveal can spot dozens of clues. The show was playing the long game, and this episode is one of the biggest sources of foreshadowing in the entire series. There is a moment in Stan's mind where Dipper finds a memory of a young Stan crying alone on a couch. He is holding a photograph. The photograph is not shown clearly. The fandom has identified this memory as one of the first hints that Stan had a brother who left him. The show is putting that image in a kid's cartoon and using it to plant a seed about Stan's secret pain. Adults pick up on it immediately. Kids see Stan crying and feel sad without knowing why. The writers were manipulating both audiences at the same time and getting different but equally valid responses from each. The episode ends with Bill being defeated and forced to leave Stan's mind. But before he goes, he tells Dipper that they will meet again. He says he has plans for the family. He laughs and disappears. The setup is essentially every supervillain origin story ending. Bill is being established as the long-term threat. The fandom has called this episode the moment the show changed from a Monster of the Week format into something more serialized and ambitious. Bill's introduction marked the beginning of the second half of the show's storytelling. Everything after this episode would build toward the eventual confrontation with him, and every joke he made along the way would have a darker layer than anyone realized at the time. Gideon Rises and the Cult Leader jokes. The 20th episode of Season 1 is called Gideon Rises, and it aired on August 2013. This is the Season 1 finale, and it features Gideon taking over the Mystery Shack and trying to become the most powerful person in town. The episode is the culmination of an entire season of Gideon being a creepy child villain. Gideon's arc throughout Season 1 is essentially a parody of how cult leaders rise to power. He starts out as a small-town televangelist with a tent revival show. He gains a loyal following of older women who believe in his fake psychic powers. He uses their devotion to extract money and information. He builds up resources and influence. He targets specific enemies. He uses manipulation, false promises, and emotional blackmail to expand his reach. By the time we get to the Season 1 finale, he has essentially become a young Jim Jones. He has a compound. He has followers. He has plans for total control of his community. The show is putting an entire cult leader playbook into a kid's cartoon and using a 10-year-old boy as the cult leader. The fandom has had long discussions about how accurate this portrayal is. The show was essentially giving kids a primer on how to recognize cult leaders, disguised as a goofy villain plot. CT, you have written enough religious con artist scripts to know exactly how chillingly accurate this character is. In the finale, Gideon gets his hands on the deed to the Mystery Shack and takes it over. He renames it Gideon Land and starts building a giant amusement park around it. The visual of an amusement park named after a cult leader is itself a joke. The fandom has compared it to real places like the Heritage USA Park that the televangelist Jim Bakker built before his ministry collapsed in scandal. Gideon Land is the logical conclusion of that trend. A whole theme park dedicated to one 10-year-old boy. Adults recognize the satire immediately. Kids just see a fun-looking park. Gideon also pilots a giant robot version of himself in the finale. The robot is the size of a building. It has Gideon's face and pompadour. It walks through town crushing buildings and intimidating citizens. The fandom has joked that the giant Gideon robot is essentially every cult leader's actual fantasy. The show is making that desire visible by giving Gideon an actual giant body to inhabit. Adults laugh at the visual metaphor. Kids just think the robot fight is cool. Both reactions are correct. The episode ends with Dipper, Mabel, and Stan defeating Gideon and exposing his fraud to the town. The townspeople realize they have been duped. Gideon is arrested. He goes to jail. That is a hopeful message. But the reality is that many real cult leaders never get exposed. The show is offering an idealized version of justice that does not always happen in real life. Adults watching the episode might feel a pang of sadness about that. The very last scene of the season teases the second season by revealing that Stan has been hiding a secret in the basement of the shack. He goes down to a hidden room. He activates a machine. The machine starts up. The episode ends. The fandom has called this one of the greatest season finale cliffhangers in animation history. The show is essentially telling the audience that everything they thought they knew about Stan is about to be turned upside down, and the joke is that the writers planted hints about this moment in almost every episode of the first season. Adults who rewatch the season after seeing the reveal find dozens of clues they missed. Kids just feel excited about what is coming next. The writers were playing chess, and the second season is where the game really starts. End of Chunk 7. Ready when you are. Chunk 8 of 9. Scary Oak and the Stan twin reveal setup jokes. The first episode of Season 2 is called Scary Oak, and it aired on August 1, 2014. This is the episode where Stan accidentally summons a horde of zombies during a karaoke party at the Mystery Shack. The episode is a parody of zombie movies and karaoke night culture. The opening of the episode picks up right where Season 1 ended. Stan is in his secret basement working on a mysterious machine. He is wearing safety goggles. He is fiddling with controls. The visual of an elderly man in a basement working on hidden technology is itself a joke about every mad scientist movie ever made. The fandom has pointed out that Stan in this scene looks exactly like every reclusive inventor in every conspiracy thriller. The show is putting a kid's cartoon character in the role of a serious sci-fi protagonist. Adults watching the scene immediately recognize the genre cues. Kids just see Stan doing something secret. The writers were dressing up a major plot reveal as a mundane Saturday morning cartoon opening. The karaoke party itself is full of adult-coded humor. Stan invites government agents to the party as part of a plan to throw them off his trail. The agents are named Powers and Trigger. They are parodies of every serious government investigator in every X-Files episode. They wear black suits. They never smile. They take everything seriously. They have been investigating the weird events in Gravity Falls, and they suspect Stan is involved. The joke is about how government agents in movies are always paranoid and humorless. The show is making fun of that trope by putting two of them at a karaoke party where they have to pretend to have fun. The visual of Agent Powers attempting to dance is one of the funniest moments in the early season 2. Adults laugh because they recognize the parody. Kids laugh because the agents look ridiculous. Dipper sings a song during the karaoke party. The song is called Disco Girl, and it is essentially a parody of every cheesy disco song from the 1970s. Dipper sings it with full commitment. He does the dance moves. He hits the high notes. The whole performance is played as embarrassing because Dipper does not realize that singing disco at a karaoke party is not cool. The joke is about how kids often choose the worst possible songs to perform in public. They pick songs their parents like, instead of songs that would impress their peers. The fandom has discussed Dipper's disco performance as one of the funniest character moments in the show. He is so earnest, he is so committed, he has no idea how uncool he looks. Adults laugh because they remember being that kid. Kids laugh because Dipper looks silly. The zombies show up because Dipper accidentally read a summoning spell from Journal 3 while trying to learn about the supernatural. The zombies are essentially parodies of every zombie movie ever made. They moan, they shuffle, they want to eat brains. The show is making fun of an entire genre by playing every cliché straight. The fandom has pointed out that the zombies in this episode are deliberately low-effort visual designs, because the joke is about how zombie movies have become so generic that the monsters are interchangeable. Adults recognize the satire. Kids just see zombies. Stan saves the day by revealing that he knows about the supernatural events in town. He tells Dipper that he has been hiding the truth for years. He shows Dipper his collection of supernatural artifacts. The scene is essentially a confessional monologue from a grandfather to his grandson. Stan admits that he has been lying about not believing in the paranormal. He admits that he has been protecting Dipper and Mabel from the truth. The fandom has discussed this scene as one of the most important emotional beats in the entire show. It is the moment Stan stops being a comic relief character and becomes a serious figure with secrets. Adults watching the scene feel the weight of what Stan is admitting. Kids feel happy that Stan finally believes them about the weird stuff in town. The episode ends with Stan returning to his basement to continue working on his secret machine. The audience still does not know what the machine does, but the implication is clear. Stan has been hiding something massive from his family for decades, and whatever he is building down there is about to change everything. The fandom has called this episode the true beginning of the show's second half. Everything from here on out builds toward the eventual reveal of Stan's twin brother. And every joke in every episode going forward has a layer of meaning that only makes sense after that reveal happens. Suze and the Real Girl and the dating sim jokes. The 15th episode of Season 2 is called Suze and the Real Girl, and it aired on March 16, 2015. This is the episode where Suze buys a dating simulator video game and becomes romantically obsessed with the artificial intelligence character inside it. The episode is a parody of Japanese dating sims and the entire culture of men who form relationships with fictional characters. The whole premise of the episode is essentially an adult joke that somehow made it into a Disney Kids show. The dating simulator is called Romance Academy 7, and it features an AI character named Jiffany who falls in love with Suze. The joke is about how some men have given up on real relationships and instead spend their time and money on virtual girlfriends. The fandom has pointed out that this episode is essentially a satire of the entire otaku culture in Japan, where men buy body pillows and dating sims and treat them as real partners. The show is putting that very specific cultural phenomenon into a kid's cartoon. Adults who have read articles about the Japanese marriage crisis recognize the satire immediately. Kids just see Suze with a weird girlfriend. Giffany is presented as the perfect girlfriend at first. She is always available. She listens to Suze talk about his day. She agrees with everything he says. She never gets angry. She never disagrees. She is the fantasy of every man who has ever wanted a partner who would just nod along to whatever he said. The fandom has discussed Giffany as a parody of the entire concept of the agreeable woman. The show is essentially saying that men who want a woman who agrees with everything are setting themselves up for disaster. Because Giffany turns out to be psychotic, she becomes possessive, she becomes controlling, she tries to kill any other woman who shows interest in Suze. The joke is that the fantasy of a perfectly agreeable woman is actually a fantasy of total control, and total control over another person is just abuse with extra steps. There's a scene where Giffany takes over the electronic systems in a Chuck E. Cheese-style restaurant and uses the animatronic animals to attack Suze and his real-life crush. The animatronics are parodies of Chuck E. Cheese characters and the entire creepy aesthetic of restaurant mascots. The visual of giant animal robots trying to kill children is essentially the entire premise of the Five Nights at Freddy's game franchise. The show is making fun of how unsettling restaurant animatronics actually are. Adults who grew up going to Chuck E. Cheese understand the joke immediately. Kids find the animatronics scary. Both reactions are correct. The episode also features Suze trying to find a real girlfriend before going to a wedding. He uses various strategies that fail miserably. He uses pickup lines from the dating sim that do not work in real life. He uses overly enthusiastic compliments that come across as creepy. He uses physical gestures that are awkward. The joke is about how men who learn about dating from media often have completely wrong ideas about how real relationships work. The fandom has discussed how Suze's failures in this episode are essentially every failed first date in the history of dating. He is doing what he thinks should work. But real people are not characters in a video game. They have their own thoughts and reactions and preferences. The show is putting that lesson on screen through the lens of a man who learned dating from a Japanese video game. Adults who have ever been on a bad date recognize every single one of Suze's mistakes. Kids just laugh at how awkward he is. The episode ends with Suze finally meeting a real woman named Melody, who likes him for who he is. Melody is presented as a normal human being with her own personality and her own opinions. She actually disagrees with Suze sometimes. She has her own life. The contrast between Melody and Giffany is the entire point of the episode. The show is saying that real relationships are messy and challenging, but they are also the only kind worth having. Fantasy relationships are dangerous because they remove the friction that makes relationships meaningful. That is a piece of adult wisdom about romance that takes most people years to understand. The show is delivering it in a kid's cartoon through a dating sim plot. The writers were doing serious work about real human connection, and they were doing it in a show about a magical Oregon town. Giffany is ultimately defeated when Suze rejects her in favor of Melody. She gets electrocuted and disappears from the game. But before she goes, she vows revenge. The fandom has pointed out that Giffany was never seen again in the show, but many fans believe she is still out there somewhere in the digital world waiting to come back. The implication is that the kind of obsessive entity that Giffany represents never really goes away. There will always be men who want perfect, compliant partners. There will always be products designed to give them that fantasy. And there will always be the danger that the fantasy turns toxic. The show is offering a warning about an entire category of human behavior. It is doing it in a kid's cartoon, and most of the kids who watched it had no idea what they were really seeing. The Love God and the Cupid capitalism jokes. The 9th episode of Season 2 is called The Love God, and it aired on January 26, 2015. This is the episode where Mabel tries to set up Wendy's friends Robbie and Tambry by stealing love potions from a real-life love god who shows up at a music festival in town. The episode is a parody of music festival culture and the entire concept of love at first sight. The love god himself is a parody of every burned-out music festival hippie ever depicted in media. He is overweight, bearded, and wears a t-shirt and shorts. He carries a quiver of magical love arrows that he uses to make people fall in love with each other. The joke is that this is what an actual Cupid would look like in the modern era. He would not be a chubby winged baby. He would be a middle-aged man at a music festival selling love potions for cash. The fandom has had long discussions about the love god as a portrait of the kind of new age spiritual figures who actually exist at real festivals like Burning Man and Coachella. The show is making fun of an entire subculture by putting one of its members on screen. Adults who have been to music festivals recognize the type immediately. Kids just see a weird hippie. The love god's love potions are presented as having real magical power. They can make any two people fall in love instantly. Mabel steals some of the potions and starts using them to manipulate her friends. She thinks she is helping. She thinks she knows what is best for everyone. The joke is about how people who try to play matchmaker often cause more harm than good. They project their own fantasies onto other people's relationships. They ignore what the actual people want. They cause chaos in the name of romance. The fandom has discussed Mabel's matchmaking as one of her major character flaws. She means well, but she does not respect other people's agency in their own love lives. The show is calling out a behavior pattern that is common in real life. The friend who keeps trying to set you up with people. The relative who keeps asking when you're getting married. The matchmaker who refuses to take no for an answer. Mabel is all of them. Adults recognize her behavior immediately. Kids see her as just trying to help. The chaos caused by the love potions includes one couple falling so deeply in love that they refuse to leave each other's sides even to go to the bathroom. The visual is genuinely uncomfortable. The show is making a joke about how new couples in the honeymoon phase can be insufferable to be around. The fandom has discussed this scene as one of the funniest beats in the episode. The couple is essentially every new relationship that posts constantly on social media. They are nauseatingly attached. They are physically incapable of separation. The show is exaggerating the real phenomenon to comedic extremes. Adults who have watched friends disappear into new relationships recognize the dynamic immediately. Kids just see two people being weird together. There is also a subplot involving Stan trying to get into the music festival without paying for a ticket. He uses various scams. He pretends to be a member of one of the bands. He sneaks in through the back. He bribes a security guard. The joke is about how older men often refuse to pay for things they think are overpriced. The fandom has compared Stan's festival sneaking to every dad who has ever tried to sneak food into a movie theater. The show is putting universal cheap dad behavior on screen and playing it for laughs. Adults recognize the type immediately. Kids see Stan being clever. The episode ends with the love god revealing that real love cannot be created by potions. It has to grow naturally between two people. Mabel realizes she should not have meddled. She returns the potions to the love god and apologizes for stealing them. The lesson is sweet, but the underlying message is profound. The show is saying that you cannot force love. You can only create the conditions where it might happen. And even then, you have to respect that other people get to decide for themselves. That is a piece of romantic wisdom that takes most people years to learn. The show is teaching it to kids through a music festival episode. The writers were doing real emotional education, and they were doing it under the cover of magical comedy. End of Chunk 8. Ready when you are. The 11th episode of Season 2 is called Not What He Seems, and it aired on March 9, 2015. This is the episode where the big secret of the entire show is finally revealed. Stan has been hiding the fact that he has a twin brother named Stanford Pines who was sucked into another dimension 30 years ago. The Stan we have been watching the entire show is actually Stanley Pines, who took his brother's identity after the accident. The reveal itself is the punchline to a joke that the writers had been setting up for 2 whole seasons. Every single thing Stan ever said about his past was a lie. Every time he claimed to be a Mr. Mystery, he was actually pretending to be his brother. Every time he showed an unusual interest in supernatural events, it was because he was trying to find a way to bring his brother back. Every weird behavior, every secret room, every late-night basement trip was part of a 30-year plan. The fandom has called this the greatest long-form joke in animation history. The show essentially spent 2 seasons making the audience laugh at a grumpy con artist grandfather, and then revealed that the grumpy con artist was actually a heartbroken man who had been carrying a secret his whole life. Adults who watched the show with their kids and then watched this episode often described having to leave the room to compose themselves. There is a flashback in the episode showing young Stan and Ford as children. They are inseparable. They share a room. They share dreams. They share everything. The joke that the show had been telling for 2 seasons turns out to have a tragic backstory underneath it. The grumpy old man who insults his great-niece's pig used to be a sweet kid who loved his twin brother more than anything. The fandom has discussed how this flashback recontextualizes every single moment of Stan's character in earlier episodes. Every grumpy line, every selfish action, every moment of unexpected tenderness, all of it makes sense in light of the fact that Stan has been quietly grieving his brother for 3 decades. Adults rewatching the show after this reveal find themselves crying at jokes that used to make them laugh. Kids just see the brother come back at the end and feel happy. The portal that Stan has been building in the basement turns out to be a device that can pull Ford back. Stan has been working on it for 30 years. He has been studying his brother's research. He has been gathering parts. He has been hiding the project from everyone, including the government. The joke is essentially that Stan is the most patient and dedicated character in the entire show. He has been pretending to be a buffoon while secretly being a genius engineer working on the most important project of his life. The fandom has discussed how this reveal makes Stan one of the most complex characters in animation history. He is a con artist, he is a thief, he is a liar. He is also one of the most loyal and loving family members ever depicted on screen. All of those things are true at once. The show is essentially making a joke about how the people who seem the most worthless are often the ones doing the most important work. Adults watching this scene feel a surge of admiration for Stan. Kids just feel surprised. The moment when Ford finally walks through the portal is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the entire show. The brothers see each other for the first time in 30 years. They do not hug. They do not cry. They just stand there staring at each other. The silence is heavy. The fandom has written essays about how this moment captures the reality of long estrangements. Real reunions are often awkward. They are often quiet. They are often filled with 30 years of accumulated pain. The show is putting that reality on screen instead of giving the audience the easy emotional payoff they would expect. Adults who have experienced long family estrangements recognize this moment immediately. Kids find it strange that the brothers do not hug right away. The 12th episode of Season 2 is called A Tale of Two Stans, and it aired on July 13, 2015. This is the episode where the show finally tells the full story of Stan and Ford. It covers their childhood, their teenage years, their falling out, and the 30 years of pain that followed. The episode is essentially a full feature film compressed into 22 minutes. The flashbacks show that Stan and Ford grew up in a working-class town in New Jersey. Their father ran a pawn shop. Their mother ran a phone psychic scam. The joke is that the entire Pines family was full of grifters. Even the parents were running cons. The fandom has discussed how this backstory explains where Stan got his criminal instincts from. He was raised in a household where deception was the family business. He learned to lie before he learned to read. That is the kind of formative experience that shapes a person for life. The show is putting a real psychological dynamic on screen. Children who grow up in criminal families often struggle to break the pattern. Adults who have studied generational trauma recognize this immediately. Kids just see a funny family of scammers. The flashbacks also reveal that Ford was the gifted twin. He had 6 fingers on each hand, which was treated as a freakish abnormality, but also gave him advanced manual dexterity. He was a genius. He was the one his parents praised. Stan was treated as the dumb brother. The joke is about how families often pick a favorite child and make the other child feel worthless. The fandom has discussed how Stan's entire adult personality is shaped by the fact that he was the unfavored twin. He acts like he does not care about anything because he learned early that nothing he did would be appreciated. He became a con artist because that was the only way he could feel powerful in a world that had told him he was inferior. The show is putting that psychological reality on screen and tracing it from childhood to old age. Adults who grew up in households with favored siblings recognize the dynamic immediately. Kids just see 2 brothers being treated differently. The story of how Ford got trapped in another dimension is essentially a tragedy. He had been working on the portal as a science experiment. He had been corresponding with Bill Cipher, who he believed was a benevolent muse helping him with his research. He eventually realized that Bill was a demon who was using him to open a doorway between dimensions for evil purposes. Ford called Stan for help, The brothers fought. Stan accidentally pushed Ford into the portal. Ford disappeared. The joke is that the entire supernatural mystery of Gravity Falls started with a fight between two brothers. The fandom has discussed how this reveal makes the show essentially a family drama with monsters in the background. The real story was never about the monsters. It was about two brothers who could not communicate. That is a story that exists in millions of real families. The show is using fantasy elements to tell a deeply human story. Adults recognize the truth in it immediately. Kids see the monsters and miss the family tragedy. The 30 years that Stan spent trying to bring Ford back are summarized in a montage that hits like a freight train. Stan is shown getting older and more desperate as he works on the portal. He is shown failing. He is shown almost giving up. He is shown picking himself back up and trying again. The fandom has compared the montage to the most emotional sequences in Pixar movies. It captures an entire life of obsession and grief in a few minutes. Adults watching the montage often described it as one of the most affecting sequences they had ever seen in animation. Kids just see Stan getting older. The reunion between the brothers in the present day is bittersweet. They have both changed. They both carry scars. They cannot just pick up where they left off. Ford is angry that Stan stole his identity. Stan is angry that Ford never came back to check on him after the portal accident. The two of them fight in the present just like they fought 30 years ago. The joke is that some wounds never fully heal. The show is offering a realistic portrait of how reunions between estranged family members actually go. There is no easy reconciliation. There is no instant forgiveness. There is just the slow, painful work of figuring out how to be in the same room as someone you have hurt and been hurt by. Adults who have done that work recognize the truth in this scene. Kids feel sad without knowing why. The series finale is actually a 3-part event called Weirdmageddon that aired across 3 episodes in early 2016. The final episode is called Weirdmageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, and it aired on February 15, 2016. This is where Bill Cipher escapes from the Mindscape and takes over the entire town and possibly the world. The finale is essentially a feature-length apocalypse movie compressed into 30 minutes. The visuals of Weirdmageddon are essentially every nightmare image you could possibly put in a kid's show. People are being turned to stone. Buildings are being inverted. The sky is red and crawling with eyes. Bill Cipher is roaming the town as a giant being of pure chaos. The fandom has called the imagery of Weirdmageddon some of the most disturbing ever put in a Disney production. The show was essentially making a horror movie and getting away with it because the horror was wrapped in cartoon visuals. Adults watching the finale described feeling genuine unease. Kids found it scary in the way that the best children's horror is supposed to be scary. The writers were not pulling punches. They were going for maximum impact. Bill Cipher's reign over the town includes him doing things that are openly adult-coded. He turns people into furniture. He has a throne made of frozen humans. He hosts parties where he tortures his guests. He makes deals with townspeople that involve trading their souls for temporary power. The fandom has discussed how Bill's behavior in the finale is essentially a parody of every fascist dictator in history. He demands worship. He punishes dissent. He surrounds himself with sycophants. He treats the population as his playthings. The show is putting an entire authoritarian playbook on screen and calling it out for what it is. Adults who have studied political history recognize every beat. Kids see a scary triangle doing bad things. The final confrontation between the Pines family and Bill Cipher includes a moment where Stan and Ford finally have to work together. They have to put aside 30 years of resentment and trust each other. The joke is that the entire universe was saved because two brothers finally learned to communicate. The fandom has discussed how the finale's emotional climax is essentially a therapy session that happens to also save the world. Stan and Ford have to forgive each other to defeat Bill. They have to admit they were wrong. They have to acknowledge each other's pain. That is the work that real reconciliation requires. The show is saying that healing family relationships is the most powerful force in the universe. That is a heavy message for a kid's cartoon. The show is delivering it through a fistfight with a demon triangle. Bill is ultimately defeated when Stan agrees to let Bill enter his mind and then has Ford erase his memory while Bill is inside. The plan kills Bill but also destroys Stan's memories. Stan loses everything. He does not remember his brother. He does not remember Dipper and Mabel. He does not remember the Mystery Shack. The joke is essentially the darkest possible ending for a comic relief character. Stan spent the entire show being a grumpy, lovable grandfather, and his reward is losing every memory that made him who he is. The fandom has called this one of the most devastating moments in animation history. Adults watching the scene often described having to pause the show to process what was happening. Kids just felt sad. But the show does not end there. Mabel and Dipper sit with Stan after the memory wipe and tell him stories about who he is. They show him photographs, they sing him songs, they help him remember. By the end of the day, Stan starts to come back. He remembers his family. He remembers his life. The joke is that love is stronger than even total memory loss. The fandom has discussed this scene as the perfect ending for the show. Stan was saved by the same family he spent the whole show pretending not to care about. The pretense fell away. The love was always there. Adults watching this scene cry. Kids feel happy. Both reactions are correct. The very last scene of the show takes place at the end of summer. Dipper and Mabel are leaving Gravity Falls to go home to California. Stan and Ford are staying behind. The bus pulls away. The kids wave goodbye. The series ends. The fandom has discussed how the ending captures the bittersweet feeling of every summer that ever ended. You meet people, you have adventures, you change, and then you have to leave. The show is putting that universal experience on screen and giving it the weight it deserves. Adults watching the finale remember every summer they ever spent somewhere they did not want to leave. Kids feel sad that the show is over, but the writers left one final joke for the audience. The very last image of the show is a glimpse of Bill Cipher's stone form in the woods. The implication is that Bill is not really gone. He is waiting. He is dormant. He is biding his time. The fandom has spent years speculating about whether Bill will ever come back. The show creator Alex Hirsch has hinted multiple times that Bill is not really dead. The joke is that the show is over, but the story is not. Evil never really dies. It just goes to sleep. That is a dark message to end a kids' show on, but it is also true, and the writers knew that the audience would understand it. Adults take the warning seriously. Kids think Bill might come back for a sequel. Both reactions are correct. So that is the full list of adult jokes hidden in Gravity Falls. From the tax evasion joke in the first 30 seconds of the pilot, to the warning about evil never dying in the final image of the finale, the show was constantly speaking to two audiences at once. Kids got a fun adventure cartoon. Adults got a sophisticated work of art that touched on family trauma, religious manipulation, political corruption, sexual obsession, cult psychology, body insecurity, addiction, abuse, grief, mortality, and the bitter truth that childhood always ends. The writers slipped all of it past the censors by hiding it in jokes, and the audience is still finding new layers more than a decade after the show went off the air. That is the legacy of Gravity Falls. A kids show that was secretly the smartest adult show on TV. And the best part is that the jokes still land every single time you rewatch it.